What happens when a single moment of disrespect sparks a chain reaction that turns an entire system upside down? What if the person who is underestimated, ignored, and treated unfairly is the one who holds all the cards? Imagine sitting in first class, expecting nothing less than the luxury you've grown accustomed to. Your meal is pre-ordered, your seat is perfect, and everything seems as it should be. But when a simple request is met with cold indifference, and you're handed a meager sandwich while others enjoy caviar and champagne, something inside you snaps. What would you do if you realized that this wasn't an accident? That the treatment you received wasn't just about a meal. It was about something far more insidious. It was about being underestimated, overlooked, and disrespected because of who you are. For Malik Harrington, the only black man in the cabin, it wasn't just about food. It was a painful reminder of the bias and discrimination that often goes unnoticed in high places. What happens next? How does one man, in a moment of quiet rage, take control of a situation and use it to expose a culture of exclusivity, privilege, and complacency? How does he turn a simple moment of injustice into a game-changing power move that forces an entire company to reevaluate its values? Stay tuned to find out how one man's quiet but calculated decision sends shockwaves through an entire airline, revealing a web of hidden biases and shifting the very foundation of a corporate culture. Can Malik Harrington's actions inspire a broader change, not just for himself, but for the industry as a whole? Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to join us in the journey of change. The story of Malik Harrington and Aetheris Airlines is just beginning, and you don't want to miss it. Keep watching. Malik Harrington sat in the first-class cabin, a place where people like him, successful, influential, and accustomed to the finest, often found themselves. As the CEO of a major corporation, he was used to being treated with the utmost respect, especially when flying. His meal had been pre-ordered lobster bisque and felt minion tuna his go-to choices, exactly as he had requested. But when the flight attendant returned with an apologetic expression, informing him that his meal was unavailable, an unfamiliar sense of discomfort surged within him. What was supposed to be a routine flight was rapidly turning into something much more significant. In that moment, Malik realized this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The cold tone in her voice, the indifferent shrug, and the way she handed him a basic sandwich and a glass of water, while the other passengers were being served caviar and champagne, made it clear this wasn't an oversight. He was no ordinary CEO. He was no ordinary passenger. He was the only black man in first class, and that feeling hit him sharply. This wasn't just about a meal. This was about disrespect, disregard, and yet another instance of being treated as invisible. And Malik Harrington wasn't the type of man to let that slide. What came next would alter everything for Aetheris Airlines and send a message no one could ignore. Keep watching to see how a small moment of disrespect turned into a powerful catalyst for change. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Trust me, you'll want to watch how this unfolds. Malik Harrington, a man used to commanding boardrooms and navigating billion-dollar deals, never imagined that his flight on Aetheris Airlines Avalon 7 would witness a transformation he had never expected. He moved through the first-class cabin with quiet confidence, his custom-tailored navy suit and polished loafers an embodiment of the quiet power he wielded in every business negotiation. The scent of freshly pressed linen and champagne wafted through the air, the very essence of the luxury Aetheris Airlines prided itself on. As he settled into his seat, Malik opened his tablet, reviewing a presentation about a merger he was set to finalize the following morning in Ellesmere. His mind was already a step ahead, planning the next big move in his company's European expansion. But even as he focused on his work, he felt something was off. He could hear the quiet murmurs of the passengers around him, the subtle hum of the aircraft's engines. Everything seemed as it should be until the flight attendant returned with the menu. He barely glanced up. He had already ordered, as always, knowing exactly what he wanted. Lobster bisque, followed by felt minion tuna, an exclusive luxury that came with his place. It wasn't just a meal. It was a symbol of how he expected to be treated by companies like Aetheris Airlines, which catered to high-paying clients. He placed his order calmly, almost reflexively, and returned to his work. But this time, the flight attendant's response was different. She left too quickly, almost too quickly, and something about it didn't sit right with him. A few moments later, she returned, a forced smile on her face. "I'm sorry, sir. We're out of the premium meals. You'll need to choose from the regular menu." Her voice was smooth, but there was something in it that unsettled him. Malik furrowed his brow, confused, out of stock, but he had pre-ordered. She answered with such indifference that it almost felt like he didn't matter. "It seems your meal wasn't recorded," she said, then quickly turned and walked away before he could respond. His jaw clenched, but his face remained calm. What had just happened? For over 10 years, Malik had flown with Aetheris Airlines, and never before had his pre-ordered meal been forgotten, especially in first class. He looked down at the tray in front of him, a plain sandwich and a glass of water, mocking him, while the passengers around him, all white men in expensive suits, were being served caviar and champagne. This wasn't just about a meal. This wasn't just a minor mistake. The flight attendant's indifference, the way she rushed off without offering a solution or an apology, said it all. He had been overlooked not just as a customer, but as a human being. He was the only black man in the cabin. And in that moment, the weight of it was more apparent than ever. He looked around the cabin, his gaze locking on the other passengers. 6 men, all seated comfortably, sipping champagne and chatting. They hadn't noticed what had just happened, and they never would. For them, this flight was just another part of their daily routine. But for Malik, this was different. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern. Malik was no stranger to this kind of treatment. He was used to the subtle, insidious ways in which people like him were assumed not to belong in certain spaces, not to deserve the same level of respect as others. But Malik was also a strategist. He didn't react impulsively. No, he would make them pay for this disrespect, but in his own way, calmly, quietly, but decisively. In the next 10 minutes, his mind raced with quiet fury. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a random accident. Something had happened behind the scenes to lead to this moment. As his fingers drummed softly on the armrest, he realized that he had been marginalized, considered not worth the effort. But Malik wasn't the type of man to let this pass unnoticed. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Elliot Vance, his assistant. "Is everything okay?" The message was simple. Malik didn't just sit there feeling humiliated. He wasn't going to let Aetheris Airlines get away with this. He replied with a single, terse sentence. "Start the internal audit process. Avalon 7. Need the attendant's ID. Confirm when ready." This was no longer just about a meal. It was no longer about the flight attendant's casual dismissal. This was about sending a message. He would expose the culture of exclusivity, the broken promises, and turn this into a lesson for everyone at Aetheris Airlines. Malik Harrington's brow furrowed in confusion. Out of stock. He had pre-ordered. The flight attendant's response was apathetic, curt, and completely lacking in concern. Your order must not have been confirmed. Sometimes these things happen, she said, before quickly turning and walking away before he had a chance to respond. His jaw clenched, but his face remained expressionless. He couldn't believe what had just happened. For over a decade, Malik Harrington had chosen Aetheris Airlines for his flights. Never before had his pre-ordered meal been overlooked, especially in first class. Malik stared at the tray in front of him, a bland sandwich and a glass of lukewarm water mocking him right before his eyes. Meanwhile, the passengers around him, all white men in expensive suits, were being served caviar and champagne. This wasn't just a meal. This wasn't a minor oversight. The way the flight attendant had acted, the way her body language screamed that she didn't want to be there. Her quick shrug and her failure to apologize made it clear to him he wasn't just being ignored as a customer. He was being treated like he didn't exist. He was the only black man in the cabin, and in that moment, the weight of it hit him more clearly than ever. Malik scanned the cabin, his eyes locking onto the other passengers. 6 men, all seated comfortably, sipping champagne and chatting. They hadn't noticed a thing, and they never would. For them, this flight was just part of their daily routine. But for Malik Harrington, this was something else entirely. This wasn't just a small mistake. This was a pattern, a method he had become all too familiar with. Malik was no stranger to this kind of treatment. He had lived with this subtle indifference countless times before. The unspoken assumptions that he didn't belong in certain spaces, that he wasn't deserving of the same treatment as others. But Malik was not the kind of person to react impulsively. He wasn't the type to let emotions drive his actions. No, he would make them pay, but he would do it calmly, quietly, but with unyielding resolve. In the next 10 minutes, his mind churned with quiet fury. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a random accident. Something had happened behind the scenes to lead to this moment. As his fingers drummed rhythmically on the armrest, he realized that he had been sidelined, treated as someone unworthy of effort. But Malik was not the type of person to let this pass without consequence. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was Elliot Vance, his assistant. Is everything okay? The message was simple. Malik was not the type of person to sit there and endure humiliation. He wouldn't let Aetheris Airlines get away with this easily. He responded with a single, terse sentence. Start the internal audit process. Avalon 7 flight. Need the attendant's ID. Confirm when ready. This was no longer about a meal. This was no longer about the flight attendant's disregard for him. This was about sending a message. He would expose this culture of exclusivity, the forgotten promises, and turn this into a lesson for everyone at Aetheris Airlines. What he was doing wasn't just about seeking justice for himself. He would make an entire system change, make them pay for their discrimination, and force them to realize that no one had the right to treat others this way. Malik Harrington sat there, his face calm, but his mind already formulating a plan. Everything would change when he set foot in Ellesmere. The way he was reacting wasn't impulsive. He was a man who knew patience, who knew when to wait for the right moment to strike. And now, that moment had arrived. A plan had already taken shape in his mind. Now, all he had to do was wait. The flight continued, but Malik Harrington remained calm, his face expressionless, as if he had melted into the surrounding silence. The flight attendants went about their work, none of them realizing that something monumental was unfolding in the shadows. They were too busy serving drinks and chatting with the other passengers to notice the man who had been made to feel invisible. But meanwhile, Malik Harrington was silently crafting his next move. As the plane began its descent into Ellesmere, everything was about to change. Elliot Vance, Malik's loyal assistant, had already begun digging through the airline's employee records. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, accessing the files of the flight attendants on the flight. He knew that Malik Harrington's request wasn't just a routine one. Everything had a purpose. He dug into the records and discovered that the attendant who had denied Malik Harrington's meal had a history of complaints, racist remarks, rude behavior, and negative comments about prioritizing certain customers. This was not an isolated incident. This was part of a system, a long-standing habit. In the business world, even the smallest act of disrespect could create ripples. For Malik Harrington, this was never just about seeking justice for himself. It was about exposing the system, forcing it to change, and ensuring that no one would ever have to endure this kind of treatment again. Malik Harrington pressed the button to call the attendant once more. But this time, he wasn't simply requesting a meal. When the older attendant approached, there was a hesitation in his steps, as if he sensed that something had shifted. Malik Harrington was no longer the man who had quietly placed his order before. His voice, though calm, carried a firm resolve as he demanded an explanation for the meal issue once again. His gaze fixed on the attendant's face. "I ordered a premium meal," Malik Harrington said, his voice slow but decisive. "Yet I was served something else." "What did you say about prioritizing customers? Can you explain this to me?" The attendant stuttered, unable to answer before Malik Harrington cut him off. "I understand." His words flowed smoothly, precisely, as if nothing could shake him. "I completely understand." Malik Harrington continued, his gaze unwavering on the attendant. The plane began its descent into Ellesmere, but Malik Harrington was already a step ahead. He had prepared for his next action, and when it unfolded, the outcome would be undeniable. As the plane touched down, he knew that Aetheris Airlines would feel the impact of his quiet decision. It was no longer about him or the flight attendants. His goal was to make an airline, proud of its luxury, understand the true meaning of respect. The moment the plane landed, two sharply dressed officials from Aetheris Airlines were waiting for him. Malik Harrington walked past them without a word. He had already sent video evidence of the incident to the CEO of Aetheris Airlines, and a full audit request had been set in motion. What the flight attendants didn't know, what no one knew, was that Malik Harrington had set a sophisticated trap that would expose every subtle form of discrimination that had been overlooked for years. When the crew disembarked, they wouldn't be greeted as usual. Instead, they would be met by a team of human resources personnel. From now on, no act of disrespect would go unaddressed. The truth was, the actions they thought were insignificant had cost them everything. They didn't realize that a small act of disrespect had sent shockwaves through the entire system. When they disembarked and faced the human resources team, their careers would be wiped out before their eyes, and the behavior they assumed no one knew about would be laid bare. Malik Harrington didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to create a loud confrontation. His silence was the warning. Those who once thought they could disregard respect would soon realize that their actions would never escape the consequences. The change had begun the moment he boarded the plane. Malik Harrington's actions weren't just about revenge. They were a powerful message to Aetheris Airlines and anyone else who thought discrimination could continue without consequence. The disrespect shown by the flight attendants would no longer be tolerated. And as they would soon realize, Malik Harrington was not someone who could be underestimated. As he watched the crew move mindlessly toward the emergency exit, a sense of satisfaction spread through him. He didn't need to say anything to them. He didn't need to create a scene. They would soon realize that their behavior had consequences they could not avoid. The transformation had already begun. As the plane landed in Ellesmere, Malik Harrington's plan was set in motion. The flight attendants, still unaware of what was coming, continued with their work as usual, thinking everything was fine, but the reality was far from it. The moment they stepped off the plane, they were met by a team of human resources personnel. Their careers were crumbling before their eyes. They had no idea that their actions, the sneering looks, the indifferent attitude, and the bias had led them to the brink of being fired. All because they failed to recognize the power they were dealing with when the person in seat 1A spoke up. The flight attendants who had once dismissed Malik Harrington were not met with a dramatic confrontation. Instead, they were quietly escorted away, their HR files suspended, and their behavior under review. This wasn't just a typical firing. This was a statement. A single act of disrespect had caused a well-established system to crumble, one that had long allowed such behavior to exist unchecked. Malik Harrington's message was clear. No one, no matter their position, had the right to treat others as if they were inferior. When the leadership of Aetheris Airlines discovered what had happened, the change was already underway. This was not a noisy protest or a public call for action. It was a quiet, calculated strike, forcing them to acknowledge the flaws in their service and culture. Malik Harrington didn't just make the flight attendants accountable. He had sparked a shift in the company's entire value system, proving that respect and fairness were not negotiable. They were non-negotiable conditions. The flight attendants had not only lost their jobs, but also lost the privilege of thinking they could disregard anyone. And just like that, Malik Harrington made his mark, not with loud protests or dramatic confrontations, but with a quiet, decisive move that spoke volumes. By holding those in power accountable for their actions, he didn't just change his own fate, he sparked a transformation in an entire company's culture. One small act of disrespect turned into a catalyst for change that would resonate long after the flight had landed. The flight attendants who had once felt they could dismiss him were now forced to face the consequences of their actions. What started as a simple oversight became a powerful message. Respect and equality are not negotiable. They are mandatory. And no matter how high or low you are in the corporate hierarchy, no one should ever be treated as less than anyone else. In the end, Malik Harrington's strategy wasn't just about confronting a single wrong. It was about forcing Aetheris Airlines to confront its own systemic biases and practices. His actions spoke to a larger truth, that small acts of discrimination, however subtle, create ripples that can change the course of history. As the company begins to shift, and as the leaders of Aetheris Airlines are forced to acknowledge the flaws in their culture, we are reminded that true power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it's about making a statement with actions, not words. This story isn't just about one man and his journey to be seen and respected. It's about the power of taking a stand for what's right. It's a reminder that no matter who we are, we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. If this story inspired you, made you think, or simply moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We have more powerful, thought-provoking stories coming your way, and we want you to be part of the conversation. Let's continue this journey together and make sure that respect and equality are always part of the conversation.